This story happened, according to legend, at the end of the 19th century, when Yakutia was already part of Russia and was, accordingly, divided into districts and counties. The official heads of the villages at that time were the Taiyan princes from among the rich Yakuts. The story tells about one such prince from the central district. This prince was despotic even by the standards of those dark times. He took all the people's goods to himself in his village, built himself an estate unprecedented in luxury, sucked all the juices out of the poor and repaired the court according to his own distorted ideas. However, the tribute from the population was regularly collected and sent to the center. So the authorities were happy with him and were not going to change him for another. One autumn evening, a tramp came to the house and asked for dinner and an overnight stay. And a common phenomenon for those times. As a rule, vagrants paid for this service by doing some kind of household work that the owner assigned them. But this tramp looked so frail that the prince, casting a haughty glance at him, ordered him to be kicked out of the yard, which grossly contradicts rural Yakut etiquette. Usually, even the most spoiled rich people gave such guests a place at least in the stable. And so they did. But later the prince noticed that the tramp somehow got into the manor again and was hanging around the porch. The prince got angry, ordered to catch the persistent guest and bring him to him. The tramp was dragged in, and the prince asked him why he was not leaving. "Nowhere to spend the night," the tramp replied plaintively. "And I'm hungry, but there's nowhere else to go. If I give you food and shelter, how can you repay me, you ragamuffin?" The prince asked mockingly, already thinking how to mock the poor man. "Well, I can't do much," he hesitated. "But I know how to tell Alancho a little." Here it should be explained that Alanko is a kind of oral Yakut folk epic, a very long song epic tale about the struggle of the forces of good and evil. Sometimes it comes to hundreds of thousands of lines. Masters of Alancho, capable of improvising non-stop for hours and even days on end and captivating listeners. They were highly revered in pre-revolutionary Yakutia, when the people had little entertainment. "Really?" The prince did not believe it. "Are you the master of Alancho?" "Well, people seem to like the way I tell them," the tramp replied uncertainly. The prince didn't really believe him, but there was nothing to do in the evening anyway, and he decided to give the guest a chance. He wanted to listen to Alanko. And if the tramp lied, then you can give him a terrible punishment for it. Also a good entertainment. "Then stay," he said. "You will tell me Alancho before going to bed until I fall asleep. And woe to you if I don't like your Alankum." That's what we decided. The prince again showed himself not at his best and gave the guest the farthest and coldest corner of the house as a place to sleep, where they simply laid a hard hide on the floor. Although the dinner for the prince's family was hearty and there was a lot left, the tramp still gave only a tiny portion of cottage cheese and a piece of stale bread. He did not express his dissatisfaction with anything. Evening came, a fire was burning in the stove, the prince settled down on his big bed with his young wife. Both covered themselves with a blanket and began to listen to the Alancho from the tramp. To the surprise of the prince, he told a very good story. From time to time, uttering cheers, the prince listened for about half an hour, but then he wanted to correct the need. Telling the tramp to stop for a minute, he left the house and went to the latrine. The sky was overcast, a cold rain was falling. When the prince began to do what he came out for, suddenly something grabbed him by the shoulders and lifted him off the ground. He looked up and was stunned. A huge black vulture clutched his shoulders in its claws and carried him somewhere into the sky. The prince began to kick, but then realized that if the bird let him go, he would break. And froze. We flew for a long time, the cold air managed to cool the prince to a pulp. And then the vulture threw him down on some wasteland, where a huge bonfire was burning, and ugly naked women of gigantic stature were dancing around it. When the prince got up, one of the women came up to him and began to put the nipple of a magnificent breast right into his mouth. He tried to turn away, but he was paralyzed, and milk poured into his mouth. Only it turned out to be blood, and not milk at all. In order not to drown, the prince began to swallow blood. After getting him drunk, the woman laughed. "Now you have tasted human blood and separated yourself from the light. You've become one of us." The prince looked at himself and was surprised. His body was transformed, covered with ulcers and bumps, and began to resemble something human. The woman said to him, "Now you have found your true self, which you have been hiding all these years. It is not for nothing that I sent my faithful messenger to you under the guise of a wandering singer, so that he would tear out your soul and send you here to the lower world. Now you will be able to discard human conventions and do true evil." "And how?" the prince asked timidly. "We'll send you back to the middle world, and you can do whatever bad things you want there." With these words, the woman snapped her fingers. Some half-human, half-beast appeared and surrounded the prince. His skin was torn off, his neck was broken, and his head was turned backwards. They cut off the nose, lips, ears, and took the scalp. Then the vulture again carried the writhing prince up somewhere and dropped him in a deserted area. The prince realized that he was in one of the glades near his village. The sunlight hurt him, and when he saw people, he began to panic, and he could not return to the village and show himself to people. So he huddled for many months in frozen abandoned houses and became increasingly embittered at the whole world. When people came to his empty abode to spend the night, at night the prince crept up to them, strangled and then devoured their flesh. But that only made his hunger more excruciating. Finally, the residents of a nearby village decided to summon a shaman to expel the evil spirits that kill people. And one morning a shaman came to the clearing and began to perform a ritual of exorcism. The prince felt as if he was burning alive, and suddenly realized that his body was really engulfed by flames tearing from the inside. He screamed in horror, realizing that this was the end. "I woke up on my bed, and it turns out he was fast asleep listening to Alan Cho. His wife was already asleep, the fire in the stove was almost out, and the tramp was looking at him with a half-smile. "Well? Did you like my Alan Cho?" he asked. "Is it enough for you or should I continue?" Waking up from his stupor, the prince jumped up and ordered the stove to be lit again. He ordered to prepare a big dinner and move the guest to the best bedroom. The household looked at the despot with surprise, saying, what had come over him? In general, the tramp spent the night like a king, and in the morning the prince gave him one of his best horses and gave him a substantial sum of money. After saying goodbye to him, the tramp left the yard and left the village. And only after some time the prince found out that recently one of the great shamans of that time came incognito through his district somewhere to the north on his business.